My family ordered me to let the wounded Mafia Boss die. Instead, I hid him in my bedroom. What could possibly lead to a choice like that? And what happens when one decision changes everything? Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm so glad you're here for another unforgettable story. If you enjoy powerful storytelling filled with suspense, emotion, and unforgettable twists, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you so much for watching, for your support, and for being part of this amazing community. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now, let's begin the story. My father didn't tell me to kill the wounded man. He told me something colder. Walk away, Rowan. Let him die. The stranger lay half-hidden beneath the rain-soaked hedge at the edge of our estate, blood spreading beneath him in a dark ribbon that disappeared into the gravel. Before I could move, my father looked down once, recognized him, and turned his back without a second glance. Then he looked at me. If he is still breathing when we return, you were never my son. He walked toward the house as if the decision had already been made. The others followed without speaking. I stayed where I was, my boots sinking into wet earth while the stranger fought for each breath. Every lesson I had ever learned told me to obey. My hands refused. I knelt beside him. His pulse fluttered weakly beneath my fingers. Warm blood soaked through my sleeve almost instantly. Whoever he was, he would not survive another 10 minutes in the cold. I should have called for help. Instead, I looked over my shoulder toward the glowing windows of the only home I had ever known. No one was watching anymore. They believed I would do exactly what I had always done. I slipped one arm beneath the stranger's shoulders. He was heavier than I expected, and the sharp smell of blood mixed with rain and damp soil until I could barely breathe. He stirred only once, a broken sound escaping his throat before his weight collapsed against me again. Dragging him across the grounds felt impossible. Every few steps I froze, convinced someone would open a window or call my name. No one did. By the time I reached the side entrance, my shirt was soaked red where I had pressed it against the wound to slow the bleeding. The stains spread wider every second. I eased the door open, listening. Silence. Dinner preparations echoed somewhere deeper inside the house. Ordinary sounds that somehow made everything I was doing feel even more impossible. I knew every hallway, every loose floorboard, every place that creaked if too much weight crossed it. For the first time in my life, I used that knowledge against my own family. The staircase groaned once beneath us. I stopped breathing. Nothing happened. Another step. Another. My bedroom waited at the end of the corridor exactly as I had left it that morning, neat enough to satisfy my father, empty enough to hide a secret. I locked the door the moment we crossed the threshold. The clicks sounded louder than a gunshot. Only then did I allow myself to lower him onto my bed. Blood spread across the white sheet before I could stop it. I tore off my outer shirt, folded it hard against the wound, and pressed with both hands. "Stay with me," I whispered, though I wasn't sure whether I was speaking to him or to myself. His eyes opened for only a heartbeat. Dark, focused despite the pain. They settled on my face as though he were trying to decide whether I was another enemy. Then they closed again. I searched the wound with shaking fingers. A bullet had torn through his side. I had treated cuts, burns, broken bones, even hunting accidents before, but never this. I grabbed clean cloth from my cabinet, wrapped the injury as tightly as I dared, and listened to his breathing. Too shallow. Too slow. He needed medicine I didn't have in this room. He needed help I couldn't ask for. Somewhere below, the front door opened. Voices drifted through the floorboards. My father's voice rose above the others, calm and certain. "Search every room before the night is over." The words froze me where I stood. My hand tightened around the blood-soaked cloth while the locked bedroom door suddenly felt far too thin. Someone was already climbing the stairs. "Hey!" Floorboard creaked outside my room. I snatched the blood-stained shirt from the bed and shoved it beneath the mattress just as a shadow stopped on the other side of the door. "Rowan." My mother's voice carried through the wood, gentle enough to make my pulse race faster. "Father wants everyone downstairs." I forced my breathing to slow before answering. "I'll be there in a minute." A long pause followed. I watched the stranger's chest rise once, then hesitate before another shallow breath came. If he coughed, if he groaned, if he moved even an inch, everything would end here. "Don't take too long," she finally said. Her footsteps faded down the hallway. Only after I could no longer hear them did I move again. I knelt beside the bed and checked the bandage. Blood had already begun to seep through the cloth. The pressure had slowed the bleeding, not stopped it. I opened the small cabinet where I kept herbs and basic supplies from years of helping treat hunting injuries around the estate. Clean linen, needles, dried herbs, nothing strong enough for a gunshot wound. I soaked another strip of cloth with cool water and carefully wiped the blood from his side. His face tightened. His eyes opened without warning. They locked onto mine with startling clarity. Instinct made him reach for my wrist. Weak as he was, the movement still carried authority. Where? His voice broke into a rough whisper. You're safe for now, I answered before I could think better of it. His grip tightened for only a heartbeat. Nobody's safe, he murmured. Then his strength disappeared as suddenly as it had returned. His hand slipped away. I could have questioned him. I could have demanded his name. Instead, I pulled the blanket over him because his skin had turned cold beneath my fingers. The simple act felt strangely personal, as though I had crossed another line that could never be uncrossed. A knock sounded downstairs. Then another. Heavy, urgent. Voices echoed through the entrance hall. My father's footsteps crossed beneath my room. He opened the front door himself. I couldn't hear every word. Only scattered fragments carried upward. Searched the woods. Nothing yet. If he survived, the last sentence faded before I caught the end. My father answered in the calm voice he reserved for negotiations. You'll have access to the grounds before sunrise. The room suddenly felt smaller. Whoever had come to the house was not family. They were looking for the man lying in my bed. I waited until the conversation ended before unlocking my bedroom door. Every movement through the hallway demanded caution. I avoided the loose boards by habit, carrying a tray with bread and water so anyone who saw me would think I was simply returning from the kitchen. At the end of the corridor, my younger cousin crossed paths with me. You skipped dinner, he said. Father wasn't pleased. I lost my appetite. He glanced toward the tray. Taking food upstairs? I want to finish reading. It was the first lie that came to mind. He shrugged and kept walking. Only after he disappeared did I realize I had carried enough food for 2 people. I removed half the bread before returning to my room. Inside, the stranger remained exactly where I had left him. I helped him drink a few careful mouthfuls of water. Most of it stayed down. A little escaped the corner of his mouth. Without thinking, I wiped it away with a clean cloth. His eyes opened again. This time they lingered on me. Suspicion remained there, but something else had replaced part of it. Calculation. He watched everything. The locked door, the single window, the distance to the cabinet, the bandages on his side. Even barely conscious, he was measuring the room. Why, he asked. One word. Barely audible. I looked toward the closed door before answering. Because leaving you outside would have meant watching someone die. He studied me for another long second, but said nothing more. The silence between us no longer felt like hostility. It felt unfinished. I changed the bandage once more, folded the stained cloth into a bucket beneath the bed, and scrubbed every trace of blood from the wooden floor. By the time I finished, my hands smelled of soap instead of iron. I almost believed I had erased the evidence. Almost. A sharp knock struck my bedroom door again. This time it wasn't my mother. Rowan, my father's voice. Opened the door. Before I could move, another voice came from the hallway. Calm. Female. Victor, my mother said. Have you seen the spare key to Rowan's room? I can't find it anywhere. Dad's hand never touched the doorknob. My mother's question about the missing spare key lingered in the hallway just long enough to interrupt whatever decision he had been about to make. Find it, he said evenly. Every locked door becomes a problem tonight. Their footsteps moved away together. I waited until the silence settled before letting out the breath I had been holding. It wasn't relief. It was borrowed time. I locked the door again and turned back toward the bed. The stranger was awake. His eyes followed me without panic, alert despite the fever creeping across his face. He had heard every word outside. Your father, he said quietly, expects to find someone. I nodded once. Then don't give him a reason. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile. You think that's still your choice? Before I could answer, he tried to sit up. Pain stopped him halfway. I caught his shoulder and eased him back against the pillow before the movement tore the bandage open again. You're bleeding. I've been bleeding all day. His voice remained calm, almost detached. That isn't the problem. I pulled the fresh linen tighter around the wound. He watched my hands instead of my face. You know enough to keep me alive for another night, he said. Nothing more. I'm aware of that. Then listen carefully. He reached inside his coat with obvious effort. Every instinct told me to stop him, but he slowly withdrew a folded scrap of waterproof paper no larger than 2 fingers. It was stained with dried blood. On it were only a handful of numbers and a short sequence of letters written in dark ink. If I lose consciousness again. He paused to catch a painful breath. Find a public phone. Read only this code. Nothing else. I looked at the paper without taking it. Who answers? Someone who still believes I'm alive. His hand remained extended. After a long moment, I accepted the note and slipped it into my pocket instead of opening it further. He studied that decision more closely than the paper itself. You didn't ask who they are. You need treatment first. Interesting answer. I ignored the comment and checked the dressing again. The bleeding had slowed at last, though not enough to ease my concern. I replaced the blanket across his legs. This time he didn't pull away. A faint metallic sound drifted from outside the window. I crossed the room carefully and moved the curtain only a fraction. Lanterns flickered across the lower grounds. Men I didn't recognize spread through the gardens in deliberate lines, searching with the patience of people who expected to find something eventually. One knelt near the hedge where I had first found the wounded man. Another pointed toward faint stains the rain hadn't completely washed away. They weren't guessing anymore. They were following a trail. I stepped back from the window. They're searching the estate. Of course they are. His answer came immediately. Professionals? I asked. Determined. He closed his eyes briefly before adding, Professionals don't waste time. That answer unsettled me more than if he had simply said yes. Whoever stood outside apparently knew enough to keep looking, yet not enough to know where to look. My room remained hidden only because no one had connected the last few missing steps. A quiet knock interrupted my thoughts. 3 soft taps. Not my father. Not my mother. I slid the chair silently against the bedroom door before opening it just enough to look through the gap. My mother stood alone, carrying a small tray. You really didn't eat, she said. You'll only make yourself sick. Her eyes drifted past my shoulder toward the room beyond, but the narrow opening revealed little more than my desk. I accepted the tray with one hand, keeping my body between her and the room. Thank you. She hesitated. Your father is under pressure tonight. I noticed. Don't challenge him. The words were almost a plea. Before I could respond, she gently touched my sleeve. Her fingers paused against fabric that had been scrubbed clean only minutes earlier. You changed your shirt. My heartbeat stumbled. The old one got dirty in the rain. She searched my face for another second. Then she nodded once and walked away without another question. I closed the door slowly. The stranger had seen the entire exchange. She almost knew, he said. Or she almost chose not to. I looked toward the tray. Bread. Soup. A single apple. Enough for one person. I broke the bread in half and handed him the larger piece before thinking about it. He stared at it, then at me. You're making expensive decisions. It's only bread. No, he answered. It isn't. He forced himself to eat a few bites before setting the rest aside. The effort alone exhausted him. As I reached to collect the bowl, his gaze stopped on my right hand. That ring, he said quietly. My hand froze. The old Ashford signet had never meant much to me beyond family tradition. He looked at it as though he had seen it somewhere no stranger should have. Where did you get it? He asked. My father gave it to me. His expression changed for the first time since I had dragged him into the room. Not fear. Recognition. Before either of us spoke again, a bell echoed through the house below. Once. Twice. Then my father's voice carried clearly up the staircase. Everyone to the dining room. Immediately. No exceptions. My father's voice carried through the house with the kind of calm that never invited argument. By the time I reached the dining room, every chair was occupied except mine. He didn't look at me immediately. That was somehow worse. I took my seat, aware that my bedroom sat directly above us with a wounded man hidden beneath my own blankets. The silence lasted until Father folded his napkin with deliberate precision. Someone entered our property tonight, he said. He did not leave. No one answered. My mother lowered her eyes. My cousin stared at his untouched plate. Father let the silence work before continuing. Men are searching every acre outside because they believe he's still here. He finally looked at me. If anyone in this family knows something, speaking now protects everyone else. My mouth stayed closed. My pulse did not. Dinner began as though nothing unusual had been said. Plates moved. Glasses touched the table. Every ordinary sound felt painfully loud. Father asked simple questions that had nothing to do with the wounded stranger. Had the horses been fed? Had the greenhouse windows been secured before the rain? Had I finished sorting the medicinal herbs from the afternoon? I answered each one carefully, recognizing the pattern too late. He wasn't gathering information. He was measuring hesitation. You changed your shirt, he observed without warning. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. It was soaked from the storm. You seem to have been outside longer than everyone else. I checked the western fence. Alone? Yes. He held my gaze another second before nodding once and turning to someone else. The conversation shifted, but the pressure remained fixed on me. Every answer I had given felt less like protection and more like another thread tying me to the lie upstairs. When dinner finally ended, I reached for my plate. Father spoke before I could stand. Leave it. I froze. Walk with me. We crossed the entrance hall together in silence. He stopped beside the cabinet where spare keys to nearly every room hung from neatly labeled hooks. One hook stood empty. Your mother can't find the duplicate to your bedroom. I didn't know there was one missing. No. His expression remained unreadable. Strange things disappear when people have something to hide. He turned away before I could answer. Find it. He walked toward his study, leaving me alone beneath the empty hook. I climbed the stairs without running, though every instinct urged me to. The hallway felt different now. Not dangerous because someone was there, but because someone had begun noticing what belonged where. Inside my room, I locked the door behind me. The stranger had pushed himself upright against the headboard despite the pain. Sweat covered his forehead, but his breathing sounded steadier than before. He watched my face for only a moment. That went badly. You hurt. Your floor carries voices. I crossed to the window and looked through the narrow opening in the curtain. Lanterns still moved across the estate. The search had become more organized. Two men now worked with another carrying a notebook, marking places already examined. They intended to keep searching until nothing remained unchecked. I stepped away. They're not giving up. Neither is your father. He shifted carefully, suppressing a grimace as the movement pulled at the bandage. He asked about the missing key. I stared at him. How did you know? Because anyone who controls a house controls its locks first. His answer unsettled me. It sounded less like a guess than experience. I opened the cabinet and searched for stronger herbs, combining dried leaves with hot water to make the bitter mixture I used for severe pain. It wasn't enough, but it was all I had. I offered him the cup. He accepted it without complaint, drank slowly, then handed it back. Thank you. The words were quiet enough that I almost thought I had imagined them. It was the first time he had thanked me. The distance between us shifted in that single moment, not into trust, but into something that made silence easier to share. He noticed me glance toward my hand again. The ring, he said. You never answered why you looked at it that way. I instinctively covered it with my other hand. You never answered who you are. A faint, tired breath escaped him. Fair enough. Neither of us spoke again. Some questions had become too dangerous to ask before either of us understood the cost of the answers. A sudden scrape echoed from the hallway outside. Furniture, heavy enough to drag across wooden floors. I moved to the door and listened. Voices. My mother's among them. The room across from Rowan's has been empty for months, she said. I'll stay there until this is over. If anyone enters the upstairs hallway during the night, I'll hear it. Father's reply came immediately. Good. Their footsteps faded only after another door opened and closed directly opposite mine. I remained motionless, my hand still resting against the lock. The stranger didn't need to ask what had happened. He saw it in my face before I turned around. The hallway that had protected us since the storm no longer belonged to us. Someone would be sleeping only a few steps from my door before nightfall. Sleep never came. Every faint sound beyond my bedroom door pulled me awake before I could drift for more than a few minutes. Sometime before dawn, the hallway fell completely silent. That worried me more than footsteps ever had. I eased out of the chair beside the bed and crossed to the window. The search outside had not ended. It had simply changed. Lanterns had disappeared, replaced by men moving with the gray light of morning. They no longer wandered across the grounds. They worked in pairs, measuring distances, studying tracks the rain had failed to erase. They were becoming methodical. Behind me, the stranger shifted against the headboard with obvious effort. His color had improved slightly, but every movement still cost him. "They're adapting," I said quietly. He didn't need to look outside. "They always do." I turned back toward him. "Who are they?" His eyes remained on the ceiling for a long moment before settling on me. "People who benefit if I never leave this house alive." It wasn't an answer. It was the closest thing to one he was willing to give. Before I could press further, he reached inside his coat again. This time his movements were slower, more careful. He removed the folded paper containing the contact code from where I had tucked it safely beside the bed and held it toward me. "Burn it." I frowned. "You said it could save you." "Yesterday it could." His expression hardened despite the exhaustion in his face. "Now they'll be watching every person who might answer it." I looked down at the small slip of paper. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. A few letters. A few numbers. Yet he spoke as though keeping it alive would sign my own death warrant. "How can you be sure?" "Because if I can think of using it, someone else already has." I carried the paper to the fireplace, struck a match, and hesitated only once before touching the flame to its edge. The ink curled inward as the paper blackened, then collapsed into gray ash. When I looked back, he nodded once. It was not gratitude. It was approval. For the first time since dragging him into my room, I realized he was no longer judging whether I would betray him. He was judging whether I understood consequences. A quiet knock interrupted the silence. 3 careful taps. I hid the ashes beneath fresh wood before opening the door only a crack. My mother stood in the hallway holding folded towels. The guest room across from mine now stood open behind her. A travel bag rested inside. She had truly moved there. "You were awake early," she said. "I couldn't sleep. Neither could your father." She offered the towels. "Fresh linens. Yours were overdue." My stomach tightened. "Thank you." As I reached for them, she glanced past my shoulder toward the room. "You still lock your door." "I always have." "Not during the day." She held my eyes for another second before giving a small, almost apologetic smile. "Perhaps tonight has everyone acting differently." She walked into the room opposite mine and quietly closed the door. I remained frozen until I heard the latch settle. Fresh linens. I looked back toward my bed. The old sheets beneath the stranger were already stained beyond saving. If anyone entered unexpectedly, no explanation would survive that sight. We changed them together without speaking more than a few words. He insisted on standing despite the pain. I supported most of his weight while stripping the ruined bedding away. Halfway through, his knees threatened to buckle. My arm tightened around his back before he could fall. For one brief second, neither of us moved. He was breathing hard, but he no longer tried to pull away from my support. "You should have left me outside," he murmured. "You still think that?" I asked. He looked toward the bedroom door. "No." We finished before another knock could come. The bloodstained sheets disappeared into a storage chest beneath old blankets, buying us only a little more time. As I pushed the lid closed, voices floated through the open window. I crossed the room carefully and looked down into the side garden. My mother stood beneath the trees, speaking with 2 unfamiliar men dressed like ordinary travelers. One unfolded a rough map of the estate across a stone bench. She pointed toward the western grounds, the place where I had found the wounded stranger. They spoke too quietly for me to hear the words, but I recognized the purpose immediately. She wasn't warning them away. She was helping them. Search. I stepped back before they could notice me watching. Every certainty I had held on to since the storm shifted slightly beneath my feet. Maybe my father wasn't the only one keeping secrets inside this house. Before I could sort through that thought, a sharp whistle echoed from somewhere near the front gate, followed by hurried footsteps below. The stranger met my eyes. "They're getting closer," he said. This time, I knew he wasn't talking about the search outside. The whistle outside was answered by another from the eastern side of the estate. Whatever pattern the searchers had been following, they had reached a conclusion. I lowered the curtain before anyone below could glance toward my window. When I turned back, the man on my bed had already pushed himself upright again. "They've narrowed the search," I said. "Yes." His answer came without hesitation, which means someone gave them a better place to start. My thoughts returned immediately to my mother in the garden, standing beside the map. I wanted to reject what I had seen, but the image refused to leave me. She had pointed. The men had listened. Whether she understood who they were or not, the search had changed afterward. "You think someone inside this house is helping them?" He held my gaze. "I think someone already has." A knock echoed downstairs. Then another. Doors opened. Boots crossed the entrance hall. I moved toward the bedroom door and listened. Father's voice carried upward, controlled but sharper than before. No one leaves the house until I say otherwise. The order settled over the estate like another lock. We were trapped together now. I looked back at the cabinet holding the last of my medical supplies. Only one sealed bottle remained, the strongest tincture we kept for severe trauma. My father counted every bottle personally because it took months to replace. If it disappeared, he would know. The wounded man followed my eyes. "Don't," he said quietly. "Without it, you'll be dead by tomorrow." "Without it," he replied. "Your father notices nothing." I stood motionless for several seconds before opening the cabinet anyway. My fingers closed around the small glass bottle. The decision felt heavier than the medicine itself. Once I broke the wax seal, there would be no putting it back. I uncorked it. The bitter scent filled the room. "You're making another expensive decision," he murmured. "I know." I measured the smallest amount I believed would help and supported his shoulders while he swallowed it. He nearly refused the second sip until I simply waited without arguing. After a moment, he accepted it. Neither of us spoke again until his breathing gradually steadied. The fever had not disappeared, but it no longer seemed to be dragging him under with every breath. I set the nearly empty bottle aside. There was no hiding what I had done now. He noticed me staring at the remaining medicine. "You've just made an enemy of your own routine. My father keeps records. Then he'll discover the missing bottle. Eventually. Sooner than you hope." I gave a tired laugh that surprised even me. "You're not very encouraging." "I'm trying to keep you alive." The answer arrived so naturally that neither of us reacted immediately. Only after the silence settled did I realize what had changed. Since the storm, every conversation had revolved around whether I could save him. This was the first time he had openly acknowledged that my survival mattered too. The shift was quiet, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. A faint smile threatened before disappearing beneath another wave of exhaustion. "Try to sleep," I said. "You'll need your strength." "That sounds like an order." "Take it as a request." He closed his eyes without arguing. I pulled the blanket higher across his shoulders. This time he didn't pretend not to notice. Hours passed in uneasy silence. I spent them wiping dried blood from the floorboards one final time, washing the stained basin, and hiding every cloth that might betray us. By midday, only the ruined bottle remained as proof of the choice I had made. Someone called my name from downstairs. I slipped into the hallway, locking the bedroom behind me. My mother stood near the staircase carrying folded laundry. "Your father wants everyone in the storage room," she said. "We're checking supplies." My pulse quickened. Supplies. I followed her downstairs without asking questions. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Dried herbs, preserved food, medicines, lantern oil. Father stood beside the ledger balanced on a wooden crate. One by one, he compared each shelf to neat columns written in black ink. No one spoke unless he asked a question. My turn came quickly. He lifted the small space where the strongest tincture should have rested. Empty. His finger remained on the blank place longer than necessary. "Rowan," he said calmly, "did you use this?" Every face turned toward me. I heard my own heartbeat before I heard my answer. "Yes." He looked up slowly. "For what injury?" I had prepared lies for footsteps, blood, locked doors, and missing keys. I had prepared nothing for a question so simple. "A deep cut," I replied at last, "while repairing the western fence." He watched me in complete silence. Then he opened the ledger and made a careful mark beside today's date. "Show me the wound after supper." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I nodded because refusing would expose everything immediately. As Father closed the ledger, I understood the trap. Before the day ended, he expected to see an injury that did not exist. Father's request followed me upstairs like a second shadow. By supper he wanted proof of a wound I didn't have. Every minute between now and then belonged to that lie. I locked my bedroom door behind me and leaned against it. The man on my bed opened his eyes before I spoke. "He knows," I said. "Not everything," he answered. "Only enough to keep tightening the rope." I told him about the missing medicine, the ledger, and the demand to show an injury. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he glanced toward the folded family records stacked on the small writing desk. "Does your father keep every account that carefully?" "Everything. Medicine, supplies, visitors, even weather reports if they matter." He nodded slowly, as though another piece had settled into place. then the truth won't be hidden in what he says. It'll be hidden in what he bothered to write down. His words lingered with me long after the room fell quiet again. If Father recorded everything, then somewhere in this house there might also be records explaining why a dying stranger had been left outside our gate. I crossed to the desk where old household ledgers and estate files had been stored temporarily after repairs to Father's study. I had seen them for days without paying attention. Now I searched for one reason only: to understand what everyone else already seemed to know. I wasn't looking for history. I was looking for the gap inside it. Most books contained ordinary accounts: grain deliveries, livestock, repairs, wages. Then one narrow folder caught my attention because it wasn't labeled like the others. It held loose correspondence instead of bound pages. I opened it carefully. The first few letters meant nothing to me. Payment receipts, property boundaries, routine business. Then I found a short note bearing Father's unmistakable signature. Half the page had been torn away. The remaining lines mentioned only a shipment schedule and a location near the old quarry road, the same direction where I had found the wounded man. There was no name, no explanation. Yet the date matched the previous day exactly. I read the fragment twice before folding it back into place. It proved almost nothing. It also refused to feel like coincidence. "Did you find something?" he asked quietly. I found a question. I carried the torn note to the bed without handing it over. "My father wrote about the quarry road yesterday." His eyes sharpened immediately. Only that. Only enough to make me wonder why. He didn't reach for the paper. Instead, he looked at my face. "You're starting to ask different questions." Before I could answer, footsteps crossed the hallway outside. I slid the note back into the folder and returned every document exactly where I had found it. The footsteps continued past my room. Only after they faded did I breathe again. I hid the folder beneath a stack of harmless account books instead of returning it to the top. It wasn't stolen. It was simply no longer where someone expected it to be. That small decision felt larger than taking the medicine. I had crossed another line, from protecting a man to quietly investigating my own family. The afternoon passed quickly. I wrapped a strip of linen tightly around my left forearm beneath my sleeve until the pressure reddened the skin. It wouldn't survive close inspection, but it might explain why I moved carefully. It was the best lie I could build from nothing. When supper finally came, Father waited until everyone had finished eating before speaking. "Your arm." I rolled my sleeve up. The tight bandage circled clean skin marked only by shallow irritation. He stepped closer than usual. His fingers rested lightly against the cloth before loosening it himself. The linen fell away. There was no deep cut beneath it, only angry marks left by the pressure. Silence filled the room. Father didn't raise his voice. "This isn't the injury you described." It had already started healing. Even to my own ears, the excuse sounded weak. He studied me for another long moment. "Healing is remarkable these days." My mother looked down at her plate. No one else spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Father wrapped the bandage back around my arm himself. "Be more careful next time," he said. Relief rushed through me so suddenly it almost hurt. He believed me, or at least he had chosen not to expose the lie. It felt like a victory until he added, "Beginning tomorrow, you'll help me organize the records in my study. I want you where I can see you." Every safe hour I had used to care for the wounded man vanished in a single sentence. Father had not released the pressure. He had moved it. Later that night, I returned upstairs carrying only a small bowl of broth. The stranger accepted it without complaint. "You survived," he observed. "Barely." I told him about Father's new order. His expression darkened. "He doesn't trust you anymore." "No." I looked toward the hidden folder beneath the account books. "But he may have just given me access to exactly what he's trying to protect." For the first time since the storm, we both understood the same thing without saying it aloud. If the answers were inside Father's study, staying close to him might be more dangerous than hiding from him. A soft sound interrupted the silence, a key turning in the lock of the room directly across the hallway. My mother was settling in for the night only a few steps away, and between her door and mine lay the only path to whatever truth Father had spent years recording. Morning arrived with the uneasy calm that always came before my father began giving orders. I spent the first hours beside him in his study, carrying ledgers from one shelf to another while he compared receipts against old correspondence. He never hurried. Every page he turned felt deliberate, every silence another test. I answered only when spoken to, careful not to let my attention linger on any document for too long. Yet by midday I noticed something missing. The folder containing the torn note from the quarry road was gone. Father had moved it somewhere else. Whether he had noticed it had been disturbed, or whether he simply trusted no one anymore, I couldn't tell. Either way, the easiest path to the truth had disappeared. "You've become unusually quiet," Father observed without looking up. "Long night," I replied. "Then sleep earlier tonight." His voice remained calm. "Secrets make people tired." The words followed me long after he dismissed me. When I finally returned upstairs with a tray hidden beneath folded towels, I found him sitting beside the window instead of lying in bed. He had managed the distance alone. His face had regained some color, but every careful breath reminded me the wound still controlled his body. "You shouldn't be standing," I said. "I was checking the grounds." He stepped aside just enough for me to see through the narrow opening in the curtain. The search had changed again. The men no longer spread across the estate. Instead, they watched the roads leading away from it. Wagons entering were inspected. Riders leaving were questioned before the gates opened. "They're waiting for movement now," he said. "They've stopped looking for a body." I understood immediately. They expected a survivor, which meant hiding inside my room no longer solved anything. It merely delayed discovery. I handed him the tray. "Eat first." He accepted it without argument. We shared the bread because bringing enough food for two had become too dangerous. The meal was cold, plain, and barely enough for either of us. Halfway through, he pushed the larger piece back toward me. "You need it more. You're the one recovering. You're carrying both of us." I looked at the bread between us before breaking it again. Neither of us won the argument. For reasons I couldn't explain, that felt more honest than either of us pretending not to be hungry. Silence settled comfortably for a moment. It was the first silence since the storm that didn't belong to fear alone. He glanced toward the bedroom door. "When I can walk properly, I'll leave." "Not alone." The answer escaped before I could reconsider it. He studied me carefully. "You'd leave this house?" I looked around the room that had held every certainty of my life until a few days earlier. The bed where he had nearly died. The cabinet missing its strongest medicine. The locked door that no longer felt capable of protecting anyone. If staying means helping them finish what they started. I stopped before the sentence finished itself. He didn't press me. Instead, he reached into his coat and removed nothing at all, letting his empty hand rest on the blanket. "You finally stopped asking whether I'm worth saving." I realized he was right. Somewhere between the missing medicine and the shared meal, that question had disappeared. What mattered now was something far more dangerous. Whether I could continue pretending the people I loved wanted the truth as much as I did. A sharp knock interrupted the quiet. 3 quick taps. My mother's voice followed immediately. "Rowan, are you inside?" I gathered the tray while he slipped silently back beneath the blanket. "Just a moment." I cracked the door open enough to block her view. She held a basket of freshly washed clothes. "I thought these belonged to you." I thanked her and reached for the basket, but she didn't let go immediately. Her eyes searched my face with quiet concern. "You're pale." "I'm fine." "No." She lowered her voice. "You're carrying something alone." For one impossible second, I almost told her everything. Then I remembered the map beneath the trees and the strangers she had guided across the grounds. "I'll be all right," I said instead. She released the basket. "Slowly. If you need me." The sentence faded unfinished. She walked back across the hallway and closed her own door. I stood there long after she disappeared. Behind me, he spoke softly. "You still want to believe her?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." That answer hurt more than I expected. Before either of us could say another word, a whistle echoed from outside, followed almost immediately by hurried voices. I crossed to the window. 2 searchers stood near the side wall beneath my bedroom. One of them crouched beside the stone foundation, pointing toward a dark stain I recognized instantly. A tiny streak of dried blood had escaped every cleaning, hidden where the rain had never reached. The trail I thought I'd erased had finally been found. The blood beneath my window erased every illusion that carefulness alone could save us. 2 men crouched beside the narrow stain in the stone foundation, while another called for someone farther across the garden. Within seconds, the search that had wandered across the estate for days converged toward one place. My room. I stepped away from the window so quickly that the curtain swayed behind me. He noticed before I spoke. "They found it." I nodded once. Not enough to prove anything. Enough to stop looking elsewhere. He pushed himself to the edge of the bed despite the pain. Then I leave now. You can't even cross the hallway. If I stay, they'll search this room. He wasn't arguing. He was calculating. I crossed to the door and listened. Voices drifted upward from outside as more boots entered the house. My father's voice cut through the noise. Seal the upstairs. Nobody goes in or out without me. The hallway that had once protected us became a trap. I turned back toward him. There's no path. Then make one. His answer landed with a weight neither of us could ignore. Every plan we had quietly built depended on time. Time had just disappeared. I looked around the room for anything that might buy us another hour. The storage chest beneath the blankets. The wardrobe. The narrow space beneath the bed. None of them would survive a determined search. Then my eyes settled on the account books stacked beside the hidden folder I had moved days earlier. The records. If Father entered and found them disturbed, he would stop asking whether I was hiding someone and start asking why I had been searching through his papers. Different questions. Same disaster. I crossed the room, retrieved the concealed folder, and slid it beneath my shirt. What are you doing? He asked. If they find this in here, they'll know I've been looking. Then leave it. I hesitated only a moment before shaking my head. No. I had crossed too many lines already to pretend ignorance could protect me. I tucked the folder beneath my belt and covered it with my sweater. One problem solved. None of the others were. A hard knock struck the bedroom door. Rowan. My father's voice remained calm. Open it. Neither of us moved. Another knock followed, louder this time. Now. I stepped closer to the bed. If they come in. He interrupted me with a slight shake of his head. Listen carefully. His breathing had grown heavier, but his eyes never left mine. If they discover me, you tell them I forced you. I'm not saying that. You will. No. They'll believe it. It isn't true. He held my gaze in silence before speaking again. Truth isn't always the safest thing to hand people. Before I could answer, the handle turned. The lock held. Father's voice came again, quieter than before. Rowan, unlock the door. My hand rested against the key in my pocket. For one impossible second, I imagined opening the door, confessing everything, and letting the consequences fall where they would. Then I looked at the man who had trusted me enough to burn his last contact, accept my care, and remain hidden because I had asked him to. I couldn't betray that choice. I'm changing. I called through the door. Silence answered. Then footsteps retreated. I almost believed he had accepted the excuse until another sound reached us. Metal scraping against wood. I moved back to the window. Men were carrying ladders toward the side of the house. They had stopped trying to enter through the hallway. They were coming for the windows instead. They're adapting again, I whispered. He stood with obvious effort, one hand gripping the bedpost. Before I could stop him, he crossed the room and looked down into the garden. The movement cost him nearly all his strength. I caught him before he collapsed. His weight settled heavily against me, but this time neither of us resisted it. You should have left me outside, he said, almost too quietly to hear. Stop saying that. Why? Because it isn't true. For the first time, he didn't argue. Instead, he placed one unsteady hand on my shoulder, not to support himself, but to steady me. Whatever happens next, he said, don't waste your life trying to save mine. I wanted to answer, but shouting erupted below. One of the searchers had found something else. My eyes dropped toward the garden. A blood-stained strip of linen, one I thought had been destroyed, hung tangled beneath the thorn hedge where I had first dragged him onto the estate. Someone held it up for everyone to see. Father's head lifted slowly toward my bedroom window. He no longer looked like a man searching for possibilities. He looked like a man who had finally chosen where to look. As footsteps thundered onto the staircase again, I realized every lie that had protected us until now had collapsed, and the only thing I still controlled was the choice I would make when the bedroom door finally opened. The first blow against my bedroom door splintered the frame, but didn't break the lock. Dust drifted from the ceiling as another impact followed almost immediately. I looked at him. He looked back at me with the same steady expression he had worn since the storm, as though the choice before us had already been made. Open it, he said quietly. No. If they force their way in, they'll think you planned everything. I did. The answer surprised both of us. I slipped the hidden folder from beneath my sweater and laid it on the desk beside the ruined medicine bottle. I would not let Father find either tucked against my body like stolen evidence. Whatever happened next belonged to my decision, not to fear. Another crash shook the hinges. "Rowan," Father's voice came through the wood. "Open this door." I walked toward it, then stopped only long enough to look back. He was trying to stand again. I crossed the room before he could take another painful step and helped him to his feet. His arms settled across my shoulders without protest. Days earlier, he had resisted every touch. Now he trusted me enough to lean his weight against me. We reached the center of the room together. "Whatever they say," he murmured, "don't waste your future on mine." I shook my head once. "You don't get to decide that." The next strike burst the lock free. The door flew inward, slamming against the wall. Father entered first. My mother stood just behind him. Two armed men filled the hallway beyond. No one spoke for several long seconds. Their eyes moved from the shattered door to the blood-stained bandages, the ruined bedding folded inside the storage chest, the empty medicine bottle on the table, and finally to the man standing beside me. Every lie I had told over the past several days disappeared without a word. Father looked at the stranger first. Recognition flashed across his face, quickly buried beneath perfect control. Then his attention shifted to me. "Move away from him." I didn't. One of the armed men took a step forward, but the wounded man lifted a hand slightly before the man could continue. The gesture was small, weakened by injury, yet it carried unmistakable authority. The man stopped. I felt it before I understood it. Whoever had entered this room expected orders from him even now. Father noticed it too. "So," he said softly, "you lived." The man beside me answered for the first time in front of anyone else. "Long enough to learn who wanted me dead." The room grew impossibly still. Father never looked surprised. "You shouldn't have come here. I didn't choose your property." "No," Father replied. "He did." His eyes settled on me again. "My son invited death into this house." "I carried in a wounded man," I answered. "You ordered me to leave him outside." My mother's breath caught almost silently. Father ignored her. "Because I knew exactly who he was." "Then tell me." "Not here." "Why not?" My voice rose before I could stop it. "You've asked me to obey without explanation my entire life. I'm done doing that." Silence answered me. I had never spoken to him that way before. I saw it in my mother's face before I saw it anywhere else. Father took one slow step closer. "You believe this man deserves your loyalty?" Before I could answer, the wounded man spoke. "He owes me nothing." Then he looked directly at Father. "He saved my life anyway." The words landed harder than any accusation. They transformed every blood-stained cloth, every missing bottle, every locked door from suspicion into fact. I had not been manipulated. I had chosen. One of the searchers bent to retrieve the shirt I had hidden beneath the mattress. The dried blood across it had long since turned dark brown. He held it out without speaking. Father glanced at it only once. "Your own shirt," he said. "You used it to keep him alive." I met his eyes. Yes. No excuse followed. None remained. Father looked around the room one final time before speaking to the men behind him. "Leave us." They hesitated. He repeated the order only once. Within moments, the hallway emptied until only my parents, the wounded man, and I remained. My mother stared at the stained shirt in silence. Father folded his hands behind his back. "You still have one chance to come home, Rowan." His voice was calm again, almost gentle. "Step away from him now, and this room becomes a mistake we never mention again." I felt the wounded man's weight against my shoulder. He said nothing. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't ask me to choose him. For the first time since the storm, the decision belonged to no one except me. I looked from my father to the man whose life I had hidden inside this room, and I realized the next words I spoke would decide far more than who walked out of the bedroom alive. No one spoke after my father's offer. The silence stretched until it became its own answer. I eased the wounded man away from my shoulder only long enough to stand on my own. Then I took one deliberate step back toward him instead of toward my family. It was a small movement. It changed everything. My father watched without anger, which frightened me more than if he had shouted. "So that's your choice," he said. "Yes." My voice stayed steady. "I'm done pretending mercy is betrayal." My mother closed her eyes. For only a moment. When she opened them again, she looked older than she had that morning. Father reached into his pocket and placed my bedroom key on the desk beside the bloodstained shirt. "If you leave this room with him," he said quietly, "you leave this family with him." I looked at the key, but made no move toward it. For years it had meant privacy inside a house that never truly belonged to me. Now it looked more like a chain than a privilege. The man beside me shifted his weight, trying to stand without leaning against anything. I could see the effort it cost him. "Don't do this for me," he said. "Do it because you can still live differently." Father turned toward him. "You expect him to throw away everything?" "No," he answered. "I expect him to stop surrendering everything." The words settled over the room with uncomfortable clarity. Father finally looked at my mother. "Wait outside." She didn't move. "Victor, outside." She hesitated, her eyes finding mine before she quietly stepped into the hallway. The door remained open behind her. Father waited until her footsteps faded before speaking again. "You've been searching through my records." It wasn't a question. I didn't deny it. "I wanted to know why you ordered me to let him die." "And did you find your answer?" "No. I found reasons to keep asking." I reached into my sweater and removed the folded correspondence I had hidden from the study. Instead of protecting it any longer, I laid it beside the bedroom key. "I found this." Father's eyes settled briefly on the torn page. His expression barely changed, but it was enough. He recognized it immediately. "You had no right." "Maybe not," I replied. "But I had a responsibility to understand what I was being asked to become." He picked up the paper without unfolding it. "A fragment proves nothing. Neither does silence." He held the page for another second before placing it back on the desk. "You think one missing letter changes the truth?" "I think the missing part matters." The wounded man said nothing. He simply watched the exchange, allowing me to stand on my own instead of stepping between us. For the first time since I had found him outside, he wasn't protecting himself. He was letting me choose my own ground. Father crossed to the window and looked out across the estate. Searchers still waited below. No one had left. "You believe you're protecting an innocent man," he said without turning around. "I believe I protected a dying man. That difference will cost you." "Maybe." I glanced toward the empty medicine bottle, the ruined shirt, the shattered lock hanging crooked from the doorframe. Every choice that had brought me here remained visible in the room. None of them could be undone. "It already has." The wounded man reached into his coat with slow, careful movements. I instinctively tensed before realizing he wasn't reaching for a weapon. He withdrew a neatly folded handkerchief, freshly washed despite the faint brown stain that refused to disappear completely. It was the same cloth I had used days earlier to wipe blood from his hand after changing the bandage. He held it toward me. "You should keep this." I accepted it without speaking. The clean fabric weighed almost nothing. Somehow it carried more meaning than the burned contact code ever had. Father noticed the exchange. He noticed everything. "You've decided," he said. "Completely." "Yes." "Then understand what comes next." He walked to the doorway and paused only once. "Before this day ends, everyone waiting outside will know exactly where each of us stands." Without another word, he stepped into the hallway. A moment later, I heard his voice carrying through the house, calm and unmistakable. "Seal the estate. No one enters. No one leaves." The order echoed from floor to floor until doors began closing throughout the house. I slipped the folded handkerchief into my pocket and picked up the bedroom key from the desk. Instead of locking the damaged door again, I set the key back where it had been. We no longer needed another lock. We needed a decision neither of us could postpone. He met my eyes and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Whatever happened next would not be about hiding anymore. It would be about facing the truth that had finally reached this room. Father's order echoed through the estate, but no one moved until he stepped back. Into my bedroom. The searchers filled the hallway once more, waiting for a command that never came. He looked at the wounded man, then at me. "This ends now." I stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Yes," I said. "It does." I picked up the torn correspondence from the desk and held it where everyone in the doorway could see it. "You told me mercy would destroy this family, but every lie in this house began before I brought him here." Father's expression remained controlled. "One incomplete page changes nothing. Then finish it." Silence settled over the room. He didn't. Instead, the wounded man spoke for the first time since Father had returned. "Read the date." I lowered my eyes to the fragment. The quarry road. The day before the ambush. Father's signature. Nothing more. Not enough to condemn anyone. Just enough to demand an answer. "You knew where I would be," the wounded man said calmly. "You knew before anyone attacked." Father finally turned toward him. "I knew there would be violence." "You knew exactly where." No one in the hallway interrupted. Every face shifted between them. I understood then why Father had wanted this conversation hidden. He had never feared the stranger's return because of revenge alone. He had feared questions. I folded the paper and set it back on the desk. I don't need the missing half anymore, I said quietly. Father's eyes narrowed. No, because you still won't deny it. For the first time since the storm, something changed in his face. Not panic. Resignation. I warned them there would be an opportunity, he admitted. Nothing more. My mother stared at him from the doorway. Victor, he didn't look at her. I believed removing one man would prevent a war from reaching this house. The wounded man remained standing despite the strain written across his face. So you decided someone else should die instead? Father answered without hesitation. I decided my family would survive. The words settled over the room with terrible clarity. They were not an apology. They were a justification. The belief that had ruled our house for years stood exposed without disguise. Mercy had never been the danger in Father's eyes. Choice had. I looked down at the Ashford signet ring on my hand. For years I had worn it because I was told to. Slowly, I slipped it from my finger. No one spoke. I walked across the room and placed it beside the bedroom key on the desk. Metal touched wood with a quiet sound that somehow carried farther than any shout. You gave me this, I said. You said it meant loyalty. I met Father's eyes. Loyalty that must ignore what's right isn't loyalty. He looked at the ring, but made no move to reclaim it. If you walk away now, there is no coming back. I nodded once. I know. The wounded man shifted beside me, but he did not speak for me or step in front of me. He simply remained where he had chosen to stand. Father glanced toward the searchers waiting beyond the broken doorway. Arrest him, one of the men asked quietly, uncertain whether he meant me or the man beside me. Father did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked once more at the blood-stained shirt folded on the desk, the empty medicine bottle, the torn letter, the abandoned ring, and finally at me. Everything that had happened since the storm stood before him in plain sight. No, he said at last. There is nothing left here to command. The words stunned the room into silence. One by one, the men lowered their weapons. They had heard enough. The wounded man drew a slow breath and faced them directly. Anyone still serving the people who arranged the ambush can leave now, he said evenly. Anyone who stayed because they wanted the truth already has it. No one moved toward him. No one raised a weapon. Outside, I heard footsteps retreating across the corridor instead of advancing. The confrontation ended not with another fight, but because the reason for it had collapsed. Father's authority had rested on certainty. His own admission had taken that certainty away. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Go, he said without looking at either of us. I reached for the clean handkerchief in my pocket instead of the ring on the desk. Then I turned toward the bedroom door beside the man I had refused to abandon. Together we crossed the threshold that had hidden us since the night of the storm, leaving. The broken lock, the abandoned key, and everything that room had once represented behind us. The estate looked smaller the first morning I returned to my bedroom alone. The searchers were gone. The shattered lock had been replaced, yet I left the new one untouched. For days I had believed that door existed to keep danger out. Now I understood it had kept fear in just as effectively. Sunlight reached across the floor where dried blood had once stained the boards. The room smelled of clean linen instead of medicine. I stripped the bed myself, folded the last worn sheets into a basket, and carried them downstairs without hiding them beneath blankets or inside storage chests. No one stopped me. No one asked where the blood had gone. There was nothing left to conceal. My father remained in the house for several days after we left his bedroom behind, but the silence between us never returned to what it had once been. It was no longer the silence of obedience. It was the silence of two people who had finally seen each other clearly. He never asked me to wear the Ashford signet ring again. I never picked it up from the desk where I had left it. The empty place on my hand felt unfamiliar at first. Then, little by little, it began to feel honest. My mother found me in the garden one afternoon while I was hanging fresh herbs to dry. She stood beside me without speaking until the wind settled. I should have asked more questions, she said quietly. I looked at the bundle in my hands before answering. So should I. She nodded once. There were apologies neither of us could fully give and wounds neither of us could erase. Yet she reached into the basket beside her and handed me the small spare bedroom key she had carried since moving across the hall. I won't need this anymore, she said. I closed my fingers around the cool metal, then set it gently on the nearby stone wall instead of putting it into my pocket. Some doors no longer needed keys. Across the courtyard, he was walking without assistance for the first time since the night I had dragged him through the rain. His steps remained careful, but they belonged to a man recovering rather than merely surviving. When he reached me, he noticed the unused key resting on the wall. "Keeping it?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "No, I left it exactly where it was." He understood without another explanation. We walked through the estate together in quiet conversation, stopping where the hedge met the gravel path. The rain had washed every remaining trace of blood from the ground. Only I remembered exactly where he had fallen. He looked toward the place for a long moment before turning back to me. "You could have walked away that night." "I almost did." "Why didn't you?" I thought about my father's order, the blood soaking through my shirt, the locked bedroom door, the empty medicine bottle, the abandoned ring, and every choice that had followed. None of them had felt heroic while I was making them. They had simply been the next right thing I could still choose. "Because once I touched your hand," I answered. "Leaving would have become another decision instead of an accident." He nodded slowly, as though that answer mattered more than any promise either of us could make. He reached into his coat and produced the same handkerchief he had returned to me before we left the bedroom. It was clean now except for the faint stain that refused to disappear completely. "Keep it," he said. "This time I won't ask for it back." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket beside nothing else. The contact code was gone. The bedroom key was no longer mine to carry. The ring remained behind. That single piece of cloth was enough. Before sunset, I climbed the stairs one last time and entered my bedroom. The broken door had been repaired, the furniture returned to its place, and fresh white sheets covered the bed where a dying stranger had once fought to breathe. I opened the window wide. Cool air filled the room, carrying away the last trace of stale fear that had lingered there for days. Then I gathered the old bandages, the empty bottle, and every remaining reminder of hiding, placing them into a box to be burned. Nothing in the room asked me to keep living inside that week anymore. When I stepped into the hallway again, I left the bedroom door open behind me. I didn't lock it. I didn't even look back until I reached the staircase. Sunlight stretched across the floor through the open window, reaching the doorway where shadows had once gathered while my father searched room by room. The room that had begun as a hiding place had become the first place in my life that truly belonged to my own choices. And every time I walked past that open door afterward, I remembered that the night my family ordered me to let a wounded mafia boss die, the life I saved was never only his.